Imagine this: a packed hall in New York, the United Nations General Assembly, lights harsh, cameras rolling, delegates in perfect suits shuffle papers, translators lean in over their headsets, and the room falls into a shocked, electric silence. Because a man from a still young Nigeria has just told the West, in flawless, measured English, that Africa will no longer whisper. Now cut hard, red dust, heat. A thin boy on a village path in eastern Nigeria, wearing a shirt that's almost more patched than cloth, carrying books that cost his family more than a month's harvest. No microphones, no cameras. No one in London even knows his name. That boy is Jaja Wachuku, and he has less than 20 years to do the impossible. Because the clock is already ticking. The British Empire is beginning to crack, Second World War is on the horizon, and somewhere between those two earthquakes, Nigeria. We'll need leaders who can argue with empires and win. The colonial government doesn't believe that boy will be one of them. Even some of his own people don't. There is already a safer candidate for the future. Obedient, polished, loyal to the crown. Jaja's first great rival is not just a person, it is a whole idea that Africans should wait politely for freedom instead of taking it. He is born on 1st January 1918 in Ningwaland, in what is now Abia State, a New Year's baby in a land where years are counted not by calendars, but by harvests and rains. You can almost picture the irony. Somewhere in Europe, church bells mark the first day of 1918, the final year of a brutal world war. In Ningwaland, a child takes his first breath in a mud-walled house, and nobody knows that his life will collide with the maps drawn by that war. His family's proud, rooted, deeply aware of status and reputation. In colonial files, his people are just a line, natives, eastern provinces. But inside the compound, the air is thick with debate on proverbs, the sharp humor of elders who know how to speak in riddles so that the white district officer won't quite understand. Jaja grows up listening. Listen closely with him. An uncle returns from town and spits the word court like it's poison. They find us for land that was ours before their grandfathers were born, the man says. Another voice. We need someone who understands their laws, not just our own. Those nights are Jaja's first classrooms. He hears how a signature in English can steal a forest, how a clerk's shrug can erase a name from a list of people who matter. In the dim lamplight, something very simple and very dangerous takes root in him, a need to understand the language of power. The missionary school arrives like a foreign ship docking in his childhood. Whitewashed walls, wooden benches, a bell that cuts through the morning like a knife. The Bible on one side, English grammar on the other. The teachers promise salvation for the soul and civilization for the mind. If only the boys will repeat, "Yes, sir." Jaja repeats the words. He also studies the man saying them. Why does this teacher, with his worn collar and thin patience, have the power to decide which child is clever and which will never leave the farm? From the start, Jaja is the boy who refuses to be just a face in the second row. He memorizes, he questions, he notices patterns. Colonial administration loves numbers, so he gives them numbers. Top of his class. First in examinations. His name begins to appear in reports, not as a problem, but as promising material. That phrase is both a compliment and a cage, because there is another boy the system likes even more. Smooth English accent, quick to agree, careful never to challenge. He becomes Jaja's first visible competitor. The golden child the missionaries quietly hope will become a loyal interpreter. Maybe a minor official, black skin, white empire heart. In every test, every speech, every neat line of handwriting, Jaja feels that rival's shadow at his shoulder. This is not a friendly schoolroom contest. The stakes are viciously real. In a world where very few Africans are allowed near real power, every scholarship from the colonial government is a ticket that might never come again. A family may sell land, goats, even heirlooms to keep a gifted son in school. Fail one exam, lose one recommendation, and the door slams shut, forever. The time limit is not written on a clock, but on the thin, fraying patience of parents and the grinding poverty waiting outside the classroom door. So Jaja pushes himself harder. He learns not only to answer questions, but to predict them. Not only to write English, but to bend it. While other boys whisper about jobs in a government office, safe, respectable, he is already dreaming bigger. Law, politics, the kind of position where his signature will not be at the bottom of a colonial memo, but at the end of a demand for change. The world around him grows harsher. The Great Depression sends ripples even to Nigerian villages. Prices collapse, cash becomes scarce. Families that once seemed secure suddenly have to choose, feed everyone or keep one child in school. In that brutal arithmetic, even gifted boys are pulled out of class. Jaja sees it happen, desks suddenly empty. Friends vanish back into the bush, carrying hoes instead of slates. He understands, viscerally, that he is running against more than just a rival in the next row. He is racing against hunger, against colonial neglect, against the possibility that his own family will one day say, "Enough, come home." Education doesn't fill stomachs. Somehow he keeps going. Secondary school, tougher teachers, longer days. The curriculum is designed to produce clerks, not critics. But he reads between the lines. Shakespeare's kings and rebels, British history told as if empire is a natural law. He notices what is missing, the story of people like him. He starts to fill in the gaps himself. By his late teens, another world is pressing in. The rumors of war in Europe. Newspapers talk about Hitler, Mussolini, Chamberlain. To many Nigerians, these are distant names. To Jaja, they are signals that the supposedly unshakable empire is entering a storm. He realizes an unsettling truth. The very power that controls his country may soon be too busy fighting for its life to hold on tightly to far-off colonies. Time again. Not just his personal time, the empire's time. If he is ready when Britain is weak, he and others like him can influence what comes next. If he is not, others, perhaps that polished rival, or worse, Europeans who think a darker skin means a weaker mind, will decide Nigeria's future while he watches helplessly. So when the chance comes to study abroad, he understands exactly how rare and dangerous that opportunity is. A handful of Nigerians will be allowed to cross the sea, learn in Europe's own universities, and come back as lawyers, doctors, engineers, or not come back at all. Some families whisper, "If our son goes, will we ever see him again?" Jaja's family debates, calculates, sacrifices. In the end, they let him go. Picture the scene: a crowded port, perhaps Lagos, ships creaking at the docks, the smell of tar and sweat and brine. Young men in ill-fitting coats clutch documents like life vests, passports, letters of admission, recommendations from headmasters, who chose their words carefully. Jaja steps aboard, the shoreline of his childhood shrinking behind him. On that deck, with the Atlantic yawning out in front, the rivalry sharpens. He knows there are others like him on that ship and on ships before and after, ambitious, brilliant, terrified, determined to impress. The same small circle of white administrators and professors. Only a few will return with the sort of credentials that make colonial officials listen. Only a few will be in the room when Nigeria's future is being negotiated. He has no intention of being left outside the door. Europe, when he reaches it, is another shock. Cold that gnaws through his thin coat. Streets that smell of coal smoke instead of wood fires. Lecture halls, where he is the only black face for meters in any direction. Some people stare. Some ignore him as if he were invisible. A few smirk when he opens his mouth, expecting broken English and getting crisp, educated sentences instead. He studies law, the hard, dry bones of the system that rules his home. Cases, precedents, statutes. The language is deliberately dense, a thicket of definitions and exceptions designed over centuries. Many students grumble. Jaja treats each clause like a weapon he must learn to wield, because this is not just about passing exams for him. It is about finding the cracks in a structure that tells him, politely and firmly, that he and his people are naturally inferior. His main rival abroad isn't a single classmate anymore. It is a collective. The professor who praises his essay but adds, "Of course, when you go back, you'll be more useful advising your people than challenging the government." The student who says, without malice, "You're very articulate for an African," as if expecting otherwise. The colonial officer in training who laughs in the pub that, "These chaps will never govern themselves without us." Each casual comment is a line in the sand. Each is a reminder that he is not just competing for grades, he is competing to redefine what an African can be in those minds. There are moments when the pressure almost crushes him. Money runs short. He's thousands of kilometers from home, in a world where even the food feels like an accusation. Unfamiliar, bland, expensive. Letters take weeks to arrive. When they do, they carry both warmth and weight. News of sickness, of crops failed, of siblings growing older without him. He could give up. It would be easy to imagine taking a small job, living quietly, sending a little money home and never putting his head too far above the parapet. Many do. Here comes one of the quiet twists in his story. At the very moment when a safer path appears, he chooses the harder one. He not only completes his studies, he throws himself into the debates of the time. Colonialism, self-government, human rights. In smoky rooms and student societies, young men argue late into the night. Some say reform slowly, others say, not in our lifetimes. Jaja listens, then speaks with the calm intensity that will one day silence a UN hall. He insists that Nigeria, not someday, not vaguely, but in his own generation, must take charge of its destiny. It is a radical claim in a Europe that still assumes Africa as a permanent junior partner, and it puts him in a direct ideological clash with a particular kind of rival. Fellow Africans who believe the best they can hope for is to become trusted intermediaries of the empire, not its negotiators. Word filters back home. Jaja is not just becoming a lawyer. He is becoming something more dangerous. A nationalist mind, sharpened on foreign stone. For some elders, this is thrilling. For others, alarming. Will he make trouble? They wonder. Colonial officials ask the same question, but with a different tone. By the time he's ready to return to Nigeria, the world has changed again. World War II has torn Europe apart. Empires that looked eternal now limp, exhausted. London is no longer a city that can dictate terms without listening. Across Asia and Africa, the idea of independence is no longer a whisper. It is a rising chorus. The countdown tightens. If men like Jaja move fast, they can influence the shape of constitutions, the structure of parliaments, the direction of foreign policy. If they hesitate, there will be others ready to step in. Men favored by the old order, more willing to compromise, more eager to reassure the departing British that nothing too surprising will happen after they leave. When his ship brings him back to Nigerian shores, he is not returning as the boy from Nwaland with patched clothes anymore. He steps onto the dock as a trained lawyer, a man who has shared classrooms with the children of Britain's ruling class and outperformed many of them. He knows their arguments, he knows their fears, he knows exactly how much time is left before Nigeria's future is inked onto paper. On one side of this looming political battlefield stands the colonial machine and its preferred protege, measured, cautious, eager to preserve as much of the existing hierarchy as possible. On the other side, destiny is pulling at men like Jaja, demanding courage that might cost them everything. He has to choose how far he's willing to go and how quickly. The legislative councils are being reshaped. Parties are forming. Elections are on the horizon. There will be seats to win, debates to survive, and reputations to build or destroy. The boy who listened to angry uncles by lamplight, the student who walked into freezing lecture halls in Europe, now finds himself standing at the edge of a new arena. The law courts will give him a voice. Politics will give that voice the power to change lives. He looks at the calendar, at the relentless march towards self-government that could still be delayed or stolen. He looks at the men already maneuvering for influence, including those who once mocked the idea that Nigeria might soon rule itself. Some of them are now rebranding overnight as champions of independence. Some are old rivals with new titles. The race truly begins here, against them, against the fading shadow of the empire, and against time itself. As Jaja Wachuku takes his first deliberate step toward the heart of Nigerian politics. That first step into politics is not onto a red carpet. It is into a ring. On one side of the world, in London, men in polished shoes are quietly drawing up timetables for Nigeria's future. Committees, conferences, target dates for self-government. On the other side, in eastern Nigeria, Jaja is standing on the back of a rattling lorry, shirt stuck to his skin with sweat, shouting into a battered megaphone while thunder rolls over the villages like war drums. The British say they will hand over power gradually. His rival says, let them choose who to trust. We must not rush them. But the faces staring up at Jaja have no patience left. They are not talking about gradual. They're talking about land, taxes, hunger, and all of it has an invisible deadline. The empire's leaving, whether Nigeria is ready or not. He returns home as a young lawyer, papers in hand, mind sharpened. The colonial courtrooms smell of dust and ink and stale authority. Wooden docks where Africans stand with caps in their hands. White judges peering down over half-moon glasses. The rules here were written in London, but Jaja has studied them line by line. When he speaks, he does it with that same calm intensity that once startled professors in Europe. His first victories are small, almost invisible in the official records. A trader cheated by a middleman who lost a receipt, a farmer whose ancestral land is about to be swallowed by a dubious survey. Cases that are not supposed to matter in the grand story of empire. Yet in those cramped courtrooms, something shifts. People start whispering a phrase that is more powerful than any title. Go to Jaja. He fights back. It does not take long for politics to come knocking. Parties are forming, merging, collapsing, like waves against a cliff. In the east, in the west, in the north, leaders argue not just about independence, but about what kind of country will appear once the Union Jack comes down. City elites, village chiefs, teachers, ex-soldiers, everyone seems to have a manifesto, a motion, a demand. The talk is intoxicating and dangerous. Colonial officers smile tight smiles and write long, nervous reports back to London. Jaja is courted by one of the major nationalist parties, men who have already made names for themselves in the newspapers. They want his legal mind, his eloquence. They have heard of his fiery speeches to student groups in Europe. Come, they say, stand for election. The councils are being expanded. We need people like you inside the system, not just pounding on the doors from outside. Inside the system, that phrase again, It is both promise and trap. His old rival, the one the missionaries once preferred, reappears now with a different shine, no longer just the obedient schoolboy. He has become the colonial administration's favorite type of African politician. Urbane, well-connected, always ready with a handshake, and a reassuring phrase about order and stability. He is not against independence in principle. Oh no. He is just against any version of it that might threaten the comfort of those already at the table. The contest that began in crowded classrooms now moves on to a much larger stage. Election campaigns for seats in regional assemblies. This time the numbers are not test scores. They are votes. Picture the campaign trail. Dusty roads where children run alongside campaign cars, shouting slogans they barely understand. Night meetings in village squares. Lamps hissing, moths circling. Women with babies tied to their backs, listening with folded arms. Men fresh from long days in fields and markets, eyes narrowed, weighing promises like bundles of yams. Jaja's rival arrives in pressed suits, riding in a car that seems to shine even under a layer of red dust. He speaks the language of moderation. Give me your vote, and I will make sure we do not offend the government. Changes will come, but in a way that keeps peace. That protects our trade. That ensures no one ends up in jail by mistake. It is seductive, especially to those who remember the crack of colonial whips. Jaja, by contrast, is not offering comfort. He offers urgency. He insists that the timetable being quietly drafted in London will not automatically favor his people, or any ordinary Nigerian, unless men like him seize the moment. They will invite someone to the table, he says into flickering lamplight. The question is, will it be those who fear their displeasure, or those who fear failing you? The rival hints that Jaja is reckless, too eager, a man whose sharp words in court might one day bring police to village doorways. He is a good lawyer, the rival admits suavely in one debate, but government requires something more than winning arguments. It requires understanding how far you can go without breaking the bridge you are standing on. The line gets a polite ripple of laughter. For a moment, it seems he has scored, but then Jaja steps forward, voice level, eyes sweeping the crowd. What if, he asks quietly, the bridge we are standing on was never built for us to cross? Silence. Someone in the back mutters an Igbo proverb. A woman nods slowly. A young man clenches his fists. In that suspended second, a choice crystallizes. This is not just a vote between two men. It is a vote between two futures. The election is brutal. Threats, rumors, sudden disappearances of posters, ballot papers that somehow don't arrive in certain neighborhoods on time. Colonial officers insisting they are neutral while sharing drinks in the evenings with Jaja's rival. Counting stretches into the night, lamps burning low. Outside the tally center, supporters wait like people outside an operating theater. Every shout from inside, making hearts jolt. When the result is finally announced, it is too close for anyone to feel comfortable. But Jaja wins, by a margin thin enough that a few missing ballot boxes could have erased it, thin enough that his rival can smile ruefully and say, "Ah, well, the people have spoken," while already planning the next move. The legislative chamber he enters does not yet look like the arena of a fully sovereign nation. There are still portraits of British monarchs on the walls, still procedures copied almost word for word from Westminster. But the air has changed. The benches are filling with African voices that no longer speak as petitioners, but as representatives. However limited their powers, they are beginning to write and rewrite the rules. In this new world, time becomes a weapon. The colonial government offers reforms in careful stages, each wrapped in legal language. This year, a broader franchise. Next year, more Nigerians in the cabinet. Eventually, perhaps, responsible self-government. Every concession has footnotes, exceptions, timelines that slip like wet soap. Later, the officials keep saying. We will discuss that later. Later is where dreams go to die. So Jaja throws himself into committee work, debates, constitutional conferences. He reads draft bills the way he once read case law, hunting for the hidden trap, the sly comma that changes a right into a privilege. While some colleagues enjoy the new prestige, the car, the clerk, the murmured honorable in the corridors, he treats each day like a countdown, because a date is beginning to emerge on whispered lips. Not just someday, a real date, 1960. Independence, 10, 9, 8 years away. His rival adapts smoothly. He begins to call himself a nationalist too. Who wants to be left behind by history? But he keeps urging caution. We must not rush the Constitution, he says in radio interviews. We must move in step with our friends in Britain. They have guided us this far. Tom, the subtext is clear. Don't upset the empire. Don't trust those who shout too loudly about taking full control. The rivalry deepens within the party itself. Late-night meetings in smoke-filled rooms become battlegrounds. Factions form. Some see Jaja as the future, articulate, principled, unafraid to stare down British officials. Others worry he is too uncompromising, that his insistence on real power for Nigeria will disrupt delicate bargains. One of the most shocking moments of this phase doesn't happen on the floor of a chamber at all. It happens in a cramped office when Jaja is quietly offered what seems like a golden escape. A comfortable appointment, perhaps a judicial role or a higher-paid legal advisory job that would lift him out of the mess of party politics. Respectable, secure, far from the bruising fights over timelines and terms. Behind the polite offer is a clear message. You are too noisy in this arena. Take this post, be honored, and stay away from the nerve centers where the real decisions are being made. He understands instantly it is a velvet exile, a way to neutralize him without the ugliness of public clashes. For a moment, you can almost see the temptation flicker across his face. His family would be safer, his income more reliable. His rival would be delighted, of course, though he would express it as regret. A loss to active politics, he would sigh publicly. Satisfaction hidden beneath sorrow. Jaja refuses. Calmly, firmly, he stays in the storm. This refusal has a cost. Doors that were once half open swing shut. Old allies begin to avoid his gaze in corridors. Files with his proposals move more slowly from desk to desk. The Colonial Office, reading reports, marks his name with a mental asterisk. A man to watch. Outside the political elite, Nigeria itself keeps reminding everyone why the stakes are so high. In 1949, coal miners in Enugu go on strike over poor pay and brutal conditions. The confrontation ends with gunfire. Bodies lying on the ground, uniforms spattered with blood. News spreads like fire in dry grass. For many, it is a sickening revelation. The colonial government is willing to kill unarmed Nigerian workers to protect its interests. Jaja reads the reports with a tightening jaw. To him, this is not a tragic exception. It is a glimpse of the true nature of a system that his rival still treats as a benevolent partner. In debates, he invokes those dead miners, not as abstract martyrs, but as men whose lives were cut short because decisions about Nigeria are still being made in distant offices. As the 1950s roll on, he moves from regional politics to the national stage, the House of Representatives, committees that will shape how power is distributed between regions, between government branches, between politicians and monarchs. In London, Indian and Ghanaian precedents are discussed. In Lagos, tempers flare over which ethnic group, which party, which region will come out on top. The rivalry takes another twist here. Circumstances force parties that once shouted at each other across rallies to consider alliances, coalitions. To many, it feels like a bad marriage arranged for the sake of appearances. Jaja finds himself having to share rooms and platforms with people he deeply distrusts, including occasionally his old rival, who has now reinvented himself as a bridge builder between cautious colonial sympathizers and impatient nationalists. The British watch with a mixture of amusement and anxiety. If Nigerians cannot work together, London will have a perfect excuse to slow the timetable, to say, "You're not ready." If they can form a functioning government, the date 1960 will solidify from rumor into reality. Clocks tick in every conference hall. Then, in the late 1950s, the game changes again. Elections bring in a new house. The question of who will preside over it, who will hold the gavel, who will call order, who will stand as a visible symbol of Nigerian legislative authority becomes a fight loaded with symbolism. This is not just about procedure. It is about who, in photographs and newsreels, will represent the maturity of Nigerian self-government to the world. Jaja's name rises to the surface. On paper, he is an ideal candidate, a trained lawyer, respected debater, known for his grasp of constitutional detail. But that same spine, that same unwillingness to be domesticated, makes some powerful men nervous. His rival works quietly against him, whispering, "He is too fiery. We need someone less controversial as speaker, someone who will not embarrass us in front of the British, or later, at the United Nations." Again, the choice is not just about a man, it is about what kind of voice Nigeria will project. The debate inside the political class is fierce, but mostly hidden from public view. Deals are made, broken, remade. Favors are called in from far corners of the country. At one point, it seems certain that a compromise figure, safe, bland, neither a true colonial favorite nor a true nationalist, will be elevated to the role, leaving Jaja to watch from the backbenches as others play the central parts in the drama he has devoted his life to. And then comes a twist born from the very rivalry meant to bury him. His old opponent overreaches. In trying to block Jaja, he makes promises he cannot keep, offends factions he cannot afford to offend. Men who once saw him as the perfect, pliable intermediary begin to wonder whether his main loyalty is to anything beyond his own assent. In contrast, Jaja's stubborn consistency, once a liability, begins to look like a rare asset. At least people think, with him you know where you stand. When the vote is finally taken, it is not unanimous. There are still muttered doubts, tight-lipped faces, But the majority is clear. Jaja Wachuku becomes the first indigenous speaker of Nigeria's House of Representatives. The moment itself is deceptively quiet. No trumpets, no fireworks, just a man in a dark suit walking to the front of a chamber, taking an oath, lifting a gavel. Yet even the colonial officials in the gallery feel the shift. For the first time, the central symbol of order in that hall is not British. It is Nigerian. The gavel strikes wood. A simple sound, but heavy with history. From that raised chair, he will oversee debates that inch Nigeria closer to full independence. He will speak not just to his colleagues, but to the world, as foreign diplomats watch from the sidelines, trying to gauge what kind of nation is about to join the international community. Every word he chooses, every motion he allows or blocks, will send signals far beyond the chamber walls, and the clock has never been louder. 1960 is almost here, the flag's already designed. The date is already whispered as destiny, but nothing is guaranteed. A misstep, a crisis, a breakdown in the fragile coalitions holding the country together, any of these could give those who always thought Africans not ready the excuse they need to delay, to interfere, to reshape the terms of freedom. Jaja knows this, his rival knows it too. One is now seated at the heart of the legislative machine, the other weaving through ministries, diplomatic circles, party caucuses, and still hoping that when the final arrangements are made, it will be his face, cautious, reassuring, that foreign powers and local elites turn to. Their contest has evolved from school grades to courtroom victories to election results. Now it is measured in influence, in who gets invited to which meeting, whose phone rings first when a crisis erupts. As the countdown to independence enters its last desperate stretch, invitations begin to arrive from beyond Nigeria's borders. Conferences, Commonwealth gatherings, quiet consultations about what role a new African nation should play in a world divided by the Cold War, by the struggle between old empires and new states. In one of those crucial decisions that seem almost administrative from a distance but feel like detonations up close, Nigeria must choose who will represent it on the biggest stage of all, the United Nations. The young state cannot afford a misstep. Whoever goes will not just be speaking for a government. He will be announcing Nigeria's existence to the world. He will be tested, challenged, watched for any sign of weakness or naivety. There are names in circulation, predictable names, safe names. The kind of figures who can deliver bland, polite speeches that reassure former colonial masters and cause no trouble. Jaja's rival maneuvers to put himself or a close ally forward. After all, what better way to imprint his vision of Nigeria, calm, deferential, gradual, than to control the country's first words on the world stage? But there is another current running through the government now, one that has grown stronger with every gavel strike in the House, every sharp, principled intervention Jaja has made. A conviction that Nigeria's voice must be more than an echo of Britain's or any other powers. Behind closed doors, the argument is fierce. Some say Jaja is needed at home to steady the House. Others say precisely because he understands the Constitution so well, he is the best person to articulate Nigeria's stance abroad, without giving away hidden concessions. The rivalry heats the room, old grudges mixing with new calculations. In the end, the decision comes down like a sudden storm, breaking a weeks-long heat. Nigeria will send to the United Nations not a safe echo, but a sharp mind, a man who has already spent his life learning to argue with empires and win. The boy from Nwaland, who once sat in a mud-walled house listening to uncles rage about unfair courts, who rode lorries through dust, chanting slogans against delay, who turned down the comfortable escape of a quiet post, now finds the countdown narrowing again. He has only a short window, a handful of years at most, to help define how a newborn Nigeria will stand in a world of giants, how it will speak to East and West, how it will insist that Africa is not a mere spectator to global events. As he prepares to leave for New York, to walk into that vast hall where the flags of nations hang like a forest of colors, his old rival watches with a tight smile. The contest between them is not over. It is simply moving to yet another level, yet another arena, where the stakes are larger than either man, and the clock for Jaja Wachuku and for Nigeria itself is about to start ticking faster than ever. Estimated length. This part is written to fall within approximately 10,000, 11,000 characters. The first time Jaja faces the green marble wall of the United Nations General Assembly, he is struck by one brutal contrast. Back, home, a single misstep can bring soldiers to your door. Here, a single sentence, spoken into a microphone, can move armies without a shot being fired. One world kills men in silence, the other condemns or saves them in speeches broadcast across the planet. And he has only a narrow window of time before someone decides he has said too much. The hall is colder than any chamber in Lagos. Air conditioning hums above rows of delegates in dark suits. Translators sit in glass booths, ready to catch his words and turn them into Russian, French, Arabic, Chinese. Flags hang in careful order. The banners of old empires, new republics, fragile experiments in self-rule. Somewhere near the edge, space has been left for a cloth that does not yet exist on this stage. Nigeria's green, white, green. New York outside is a roar of traffic, neon, steam rising from manholes. But at this moment, all of that fades. Jaja Wachuku stands at the edge of the world's biggest political theater, appointed as Nigeria's first permanent representative to the United Nations. The boy from Nwaland, who once walked barefoot on red earth, now feels the polished floor of diplomacy under his shoes. And in his mind, a single thought beats like a drum. If we waste these first years, Africa's voice will be filed away as background noise. He remembers the rival he left behind in Lagos, the one who always preferred careful smiles to sharp truths. That man had argued that Nigeria's first representative should be acceptable to all our partners, the polite code for someone who would not upset London, Washington, or anyone else who still thinks in terms of dependency and guidance. Instead, the government sends Jaja. It is a risk. It is also a message. The day Nigeria is formally admitted to the United Nations, the ceremony looks almost ceremonial, almost harmless. Documents are signed, credentials are handed over. Jaja stands at a small desk, pen poised, cameras clicking like insects in a field. When the green, white, green is raised among the other flags, it flutters for a moment in a breeze that smells faintly of the Hudson River and car exhaust. From a distance, it is just another piece of colored fabric. Up close to him, it is a deadline, because there is something else about this moment that few outside the continent appreciate. The year is 1960. The year of Africa, the newspapers say. 17 African countries are joining the United Nations. 17 nations crawling out from under the boot of empire, blinking in the harsh light of international politics. Nigeria is one of them, and one of the largest. That makes it both a symbol and a target. In the corridors after the ceremony, he is approached from all sides. Western diplomats with firm handshakes and polished small talk. Congratulations, Mr. Wachuku. We look forward to Nigeria being a stabilizing influence. Soviet bloc representatives with intense stares. Comrade, remember, true independence means breaking the chains of capitalism. Delegates from Asia and Latin America, veterans of their own struggles, clap him on the shoulder and whisper warnings about broken promises, hidden agendas, aid that comes with invisible chains. Somewhere between these smiles and lectures, Jaja understands his mission in a single sentence. Nigeria must stand tall enough that no one can quietly put a leash around its neck. Time starts to compress. The crises which reach the UN are not polite debates. They are explosions. One of the first that lands on his desk is the Congo. Barely independent, the vast country has fallen into chaos. There are mutinies, secessions, foreign mercenaries, whispered CIA operations, and then a name that sends a chill through every African nationalist. Patrice Lumumba, the fiery, controversial Congolese leader who spoke too boldly about real independence, now hunted like an animal. When news breaks that Lumumba has been arrested, then beaten, then disappeared into the jungle night, the details are horrifying. Stories leak, teeth knocked out, hands bound, gunshots, bodies dissolved in acid. No courtroom, no defense. Just a man erased because he scared the wrong people. For Jaja, sitting in his New York office surrounded by papers and cables, this is not a distant tragedy. It is a warning written in blood, a reminder of what can happen when a new African state becomes a chessboard for bigger powers. In the General Assembly, he rises to speak on Congo. Camera lights bleach his face. He looks out at hundreds of heads, some bored, some hostile, some weary. He does not deliver a polite essay. He draws a picture. He talks about a continent where men vote for the first time and are shot before the ink dries on their fingers. He describes mothers looking at rivers they know are carrying their sons' bodies somewhere beyond reach. He says, in a voice that is careful but unyielding, that Africa will not accept independence that comes with foreign officers still, pulling triggers in the shadows. Some delegates shift in their seats, others avoid his eyes. But in African capitals, radios turned low and government offices broadcast his words. In Lagos, his rival listens too, leaning back in a leather chair, one eyebrow raised. He's going too far, the rival murmurs to an ally. If he angers the West, who will fund our roads? Our dams? In New York, Jaja suspects these conversations are happening. He knows that every speech he gives here is also a note in a file back home. Too blunt, too proud, too independent. But the Congo dead have taken away his patience for diplomatic euphemism. Another shock arrives from the south of the continent. Sharpeville, South Africa. 1960. Police open fire on unarmed protesters demonstrating against the pass laws that control every movement of black life. 69 people killed. Many shot in the back as they ran. Bodies on dusty ground. Shoes scattered like dropped fruit in a market after a stampede. The photographs reach New York. They reach Lagos. They reach Newfoundland. In each place, they mean the same thing. Apartheid is not just a set of laws. It is a machine that kills without flinching. At the UN, some Western diplomats mumble about regrettable events and complex internal issues. Jaja walks to the podium and refuses to use that language. He calls apartheid by its true names: barbarism, humiliation, a crime against human dignity. He does not pretend that Nigeria can invade South Africa or topple the regime with speeches. But he urges sanctions, isolation, a global refusal to treat Pretoria as normal. Again, there is a cost. Behind closed doors, envoys from powerful countries warn him not to be swept away by emotion. They remind him of trade, investment, military training. They praise Nigeria's moderation and then hint, ever so gently, that too much noise about apartheid could complicate cooperation. Cooperation, another word for compromise. Another bridge that was never built for Africa to cross. At home, his rival senses an opening. He whispers to the Prime Minister and party elders that Jaja is turning Nigeria into the loud radical of the Commonwealth, that his speeches may make the country loved in Accra and Cairo, but distrusted in London and Washington. He suggests delicately that perhaps another representative, more balanced, more measured, should be considered. For a few tense weeks, cables fly between Lagos and New York. Jaja feels the ground under his feet tremble. He knows how quickly a posting can become a recall. A hero in international headlines can become excessive in a cabinet memo. Then, unexpectedly, a twist. One of the very Western diplomats who privately complained about his tone asks for a quiet meeting. In a side room overlooking the East River, the man admits something that will never appear in any report. Your speeches are causing us difficulties, he says. But they are also forcing this organization to face truths we prefer to ignore. Soon after, Nigeria begins receiving not less, but more invitations to key discussions. Other African states, still fragile, start seeking Jaja out in cafeterias and corridors. He becomes informally an advocate not just for his country, but for a continent. Whether his rival likes it or not, he is becoming too visible, too effective, to be removed without a scandal. He goes further. He supports the growing chorus calling for the People's Republic of China, the vast revolutionary mainland, to take the China seat at the UN instead of the small island of Taiwan. For many Western governments, this is anathema. Recognizing Beijing is seen as rewarding communism. For Jaja, it is a matter of realism and principle. The United Nations cannot pretend that hundreds of millions of people do not exist because their government makes some delegations uncomfortable. He is playing a long game now, but his time abroad is not infinite. The government in Lagos is already thinking about reshuffles, new priorities. One day, a cable arrives that changes everything. He is summoned home, not to be disciplined, not to be quietly tucked away in some advisory role, but to take on an even heavier burden: Nigeria's first Minister of Foreign Affairs and Commonwealth Relations. If the United Nations was a stage, this is the backstage control room. In Lagos, he will no longer just react to crises. He will help decide where Nigeria stands before the crises reach the microphones. Back in the sweltering air of the capital, his office becomes a battlefield covered in maps. World maps with pins marking Nigerian embassies, existing, planned, dreamed. Africa maps with circles around liberation hotspots. Angola, Mozambique, Rhodesia, Namibia. A large calendar hangs on one wall like a quiet threat. Days crossed out in red ink. He knows what that calendar means. The honeymoon of independence is brief. Soon, Nigeria will be judged not by its hopeful speeches, but by its ability to survive. Economically, politically, militarily. Every month, new flags appear in African skies, and with them, new expectations that the giant of Africa will lead. At the same time, fault lines at home, regional rivalries, disputed censuses, contested elections begin to widen. His rival is here too, of course. He has not vanished. Instead, he has climbed into a different part of the structure, guiding economic policy, whispering in the ears of business elites, and chairing quiet committees that control budgets. If Jaja wants embassies built, diplomatic academies funded, peacekeeping missions paid for, he must argue his case before the very man who once tried to keep him away from the main table. Cabinet meetings become duels wrapped in courtesies. When Jaja argues for Nigerian support to liberation movements, for scholarships to bring students from colonized countries to Nigerian universities, his rival asks coolly, "Can we afford this generosity when our own roads are full of potholes? When our own children lack schools?" When Jaja pushes for Nigeria to join others in calling for the release of a young South African lawyer named Nelson Mandela, recently imprisoned for resisting apartheid, his rival warns, "Be careful, my friend. Today you call for one man's freedom. Tomorrow they will say you are interfering in another state's internal affairs." Do we want to be seen as troublemakers? The clock on the wall keeps ticking. In 1963, he travels to Addis Ababa for the birth of a new institution, the Organization of African Unity. In the hall where emperors, revolutionaries, and presidents gather, he sees the living gallery of a new Africa. Haile Selassie with regal bearing, Kwame Nkrumah with visionary intensity, Gamal Abdel Nasser with sharp, calculating eyes. The speeches are full of grand words: unity, brotherhood, destiny. But in side rooms, the doubts are raw. How do you unite countries with different languages, religions, and sponsors? How do you condemn colonialism without becoming pawns of one superpower or the other? In these whispered arguments, Jaja pushes a consistent line. Nigeria must be independent, not just on paper, but in its choices. Not a client of London, not a satellite of Moscow, not a trophy for Washington. A state that can say yes or no, based on what is right, not on who is asking. It sounds noble, it is exhausting, it is also dangerous. Because while he battles for Nigeria's soul abroad, Nigeria's body at home is growing feverish. Election crises in the western region, accusations of rigging, riots that leave bodies in gutter water. Newspapers print photographs of burning houses and men wielding machetes in the streets of cities that once prided themselves on calm. In such moments, foreign policy can start to look like an expensive luxury. Perhaps that is why, in 1965, the leadership makes a move that many interpret as a demotion. Jaja is shifted from the glamorous, central portfolio of foreign affairs to something more prosaic: Minister of Aviation. On paper, it is still a prestigious job. Planes are the arteries of a modern state. Control the skies, control trade, movement, image. But in the gossip-filled corridors of power, the whispers are cruel. They have taken him off the world stage. He talked too much in New York. Now let him talk about runways. His rival's smile is almost impossible to hide. Yet once again, Jaja refuses to treat this as exile. He walks into the new ministry, looks at the faded maps of flight routes, the files full of contracts with foreign airlines, and sees another kind of battlefield. Nigeria's aviation, he realizes, is a mirror of its politics. The most important routes and controls have been left in foreign hands. Nigerian Airlines is more symbol than substance. Its pilots and engineers still largely expatriate. Its decisions shaped abroad. If he can change this, he will not just be organizing schedules. He will be altering the country's sense of itself. He proposes ambitious plans: training schools to produce Nigerian pilots, engineers, air traffic controllers, new routes that connect Nigerian cities with each other before they connect to European capitals. Airports modernized not as monuments, but as engines of commerce and unity. The resistance is immediate. Foreign companies used to cozy arrangements bristle. Local businessmen with interests in old contracts complain that he is disrupting established practice. His rival from his perch over the purse strings questions every expenditure. Must we spend so much so quickly? He asks in cabinet. Are we racing against someone? Yes, Jaja thinks. We are racing against collapse, against irrelevance, against the day when our own officers decide they can govern better with guns than with ballots. Outside his window, the signs multiply. Newspapers hint at unrest in the barracks. Officers once deferential to civilian ministers now speak with a new, hard confidence. Murmurs about corruption, about politicians squandering the nation, swirl through beer parlors and military mess halls alike. He feels it late at night, alone in his office, staring at maps under a dim lamp, while the city's generators hum. The sense that the sand under Nigeria's feet is shifting faster than infrastructure, faster than diplomacy, faster than any of the careful plans he has spent years drawing up. He thinks of all the clocks that have governed his life: the school bell in Klongos, the courtroom schedule in colonial courts, the countdown to independence in the House of Representatives, the speaking time allotted at the United Nations. None of them have ever felt as merciless as this invisible one, ticking now over the entire country. Somewhere in the barracks, men are counting down too, in their own way. Soon the radio will crackle with a different kind of announcement. Boots will march where polished shoes once walked. The conflict between Jaja and his rival, played out in votes, memos, and committee rooms, will be swallowed by a louder, cruder confrontation. Uniforms versus suits, decrees versus debates. For now, though, he works as if the plans he signs tomorrow will be implemented over decades, not interrupted by gunfire. Because that is his habit, his curse, and his greatness. To behave as if there is still time to build, even when every instinct tells him that the hourglass is almost empty. The night his world is overturned, it takes only one sentence on the radio to erase a lifetime of titles. No roll call, no vote, no microphones, no translators. Just a captain's flat voice crackling through cheap speakers. The government has been swept away, politicians are corrupt, the army has taken responsibility, In New York, one sentence could move armies. In Lagos, one sentence from a faceless officer moves tanks to your house. There is a curfew, but the streets are not empty. They are full of rumors. Names whispered as if they are already dead. Ministers who did not even finish their dinner before bullets found them. Families fleeing in pajamas. Columns of smoke rising where calm neighborhoods used to stand. In his house, Jaja listens to the broadcast in the dark. The glow of the radio dial, the only light. He hears words like revolution, cleansing, corruption, thrown around like stones. None of these men with guns ever sat in the General Assembly. But they speak now as if they alone understand Nigeria's true destiny. He has been warned for months. In overheard conversations in airport lounges, in the restless tone of junior officers at official receptions, in the way the newspapers sharpened their language, he could feel it. Something was coming. Something that did not care about protocol or seniority. The knock on his door, when it finally comes, is not frantic. It is controlled. The kind of knock that says, whether you answer or not, we are coming in. Soldiers step into his sitting room, boots leaving dust on the polished floor where, weeks earlier, he held a reception for visiting dignitaries. The officer in charge is young enough to be his son. His eyes are hard, but his hands tremble slightly as he unfolds the paper with the list of names. Honorable Minister, the officer says, the title sounding almost like an insult in this new order. You are requested to come with us. Requested. Another polite word covering the fact that saying no is no longer an option. As he gathers a few clothes and documents, he catches his reflection in a mirror, not the commanding figure at the UN podium, not the strategist with maps under his hands in the foreign ministry, just a tired man in a crumpled shirt, moving under the watch of nervous soldiers. On the drive through the city, he sees the debris of the old regime scattered like broken glass. Abandoned cars, burned-out party offices, posters with smiling faces of politicians already in hiding or already dead. In the barracks where he's taken, he recognizes other detainees. Ministers, party officers, senior civil servants, men who used to argue with him fiercely across cabinet tables, now sit on metal beds, staring at the floor, stripped of the power that once seemed permanent. Among the names he listens for, one stands out, his rival, the man who built his influence in budgets and committees, who warned endlessly about not angering the West, who treated politics like a chessboard that could always be reset with enough calculation. Hours stretch into days. He hears that some key figures from their party have been killed. Others have fled abroad. Stories crawl through the corridors like ants. This one shot in his driveway, that one dragged from under his bed, another who tried to bargain and was told by a captain barely out of training, "Your time is over, sir." When he finally sees his rival again, it is not in a grand committee room. It is in a dim hallway of the detention center, both of them in simple clothes, flanked by guards. The rival's hair is grayer, his face thinner. For a moment, they simply stare at each other, both measuring how far they have fallen. Then the rival offers a crooked smile. "So," he says quietly, "your loud speeches and my careful whispers have brought us to the same place." There's no time for a full conversation. A guard gestures, impatient. But in that brief exchange, something shifts. The conflict that once defined their careers is still there. Pride does not vanish overnight, yet they both see the same brutal truth. The new power does not care which one of them was too radical or too cautious. To the soldiers, they are simply the old politicians. Weeks pass. Interrogations blur into each other. Questions about foreign contacts, about party meetings, about who knew what and when. Jaja answers calmly, refusing to embellish, refusing to admit to conspiracies that never existed. The officers seem puzzled by him. He is not rich in the way they expect. He has no mansion abroad, no secret account they can threaten to expose. One night, a senior military man comes to his cell. He holds a file so thick it looks like a brick. "You talk too much abroad," the officer says. "You made Nigeria enemies." "I made Nigeria visible," Jaja replies. His voice is tired, but the steel is still there. Visibility can be uncomfortable. That is not the same as making enemies. The officer studies him for a long time. Then, in a tone that almost sounds weary, he says, "This country needs less talk now and more discipline." Discipline. Another word that will soon justify midnight knocks, secret executions, vanished bodies. When Jaja is eventually released, he is not restored to office. There is no triumphant return, no press conference. The military regime prefers to keep men like him out of sight. Not martyrs, not heroes, just relics of a messy past. He goes back to his law practice, to quieter rooms, to clients who now look over their shoulders more than they look at him. In the markets and village squares, he hears a new kind of conversation. Not about ideology or independence, but about survival under rulers who do not ask for votes. Still, the clock does not stop. It speeds up. In the north, soldiers and civilians clash. In the cities, ethnic tensions, fanned by rumors and memory, ignite. Then the horror breaks open. Massacres of Igbo civilians in the north, bodies in lorries, trains arriving in the east full of the wounded and the dead. The stories are so grotesque that even seasoned politicians struggle to process them. Men hacked to death in bus parks for speaking the wrong language. Families who traveled hundreds of miles only to be ambushed at train stations that once symbolized national unity. For Jaja, these are not abstractions. They are his people, his region, his home. When the eastern region declares itself the Republic of Biafra, the map he used to work with in the foreign ministry cracks in his mind like glass struck by a hammer. The flag he once watched rise at the UN is now mirrored by a new flag, born not of conference resolutions but of blood and fear. He is torn in ways younger men cannot fully understand. All his life he has argued that Nigeria must be strong and united to matter in the world. Yet when Easterners are slaughtered in northern cities, when trains carry corpses home, the word unity tastes different. It tastes like an accusation. The new leaders on both sides see him with suspicion. To the federal military government, he is an Eastern politician, part of the elite they blame for past failures. To the secessionist authorities, he is the face of a Nigeria they are trying to escape from, a man who spoke for one flag in New York and Addis Ababa. He spends part of the war not in strategy rooms but under the threat of air raids, hearing bombs whistle overhead, watching children run for trenches dug behind churches and schools. Nights are lit not by street lamps but by the orange bloom of explosions in the distance. The photographs that will soon circulate around the world. Children with matchstick limbs and ballooned stomachs, mothers holding babies too weak to cry, lines at food distribution centers that never reach everyone, are not statistics to him. They are the faces of the future he fought for, starved into silence. Once in a crowded village square, an old man recognizes him. "Are you not the one who spoke for us in America?" The man asks, voice hoarse. "Tell me, did they hear you there? Did they listen when you said we were human?" Jaja has no good answer. He wants to say that some listened, that some wept, that some voted for resolutions that condemned what was happening. But the old man is not asking about votes in New York. He is asking why planes still come, why relief is blocked, why children die with eyes wide open. The war slogs on, towns change hands, then change back. The lines on the ground move, but the hunger line remains fixed in place, cutting through the lives of millions. Time, again, is a weapon. Every day that passes without a political settlement is another day of malnutrition, of disease, of buried futures. When the war finally ends, it does not do so with a cathartic victory parade. It ends with exhausted soldiers dropping rifles, with civilians emerging from bunkers into a silence so heavy it feels like another kind of bombardment. The slogan from the federal side is, "No victor, no vanquished." But the mass graves are hard to argue with. For Jaja, the end of war is not a return to the old normal. It is the beginning of something more fragile, a peace built on amnesia and resentment, on official forgiveness and private rage. He rebuilds his life in pieces: law practice, family, occasional invitations to speak at universities or conferences where younger Nigerians look at him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. To them, he is a figure from black and white photographs, from history books that summarize entire careers in one sentence. Sometimes at these events, he crosses paths with his old rival. Age has softened neither of them, but it has blurred the sharp edges of their conflict. They sit on the same panel once, microphones in front of them again, but the hall is smaller than the UN, the audience mostly students, in bright shirts instead of diplomats in dark suits. The moderator asks about the First Republic, about what went wrong. The rival speaks first, defending some choices, admitting others were flawed, blaming structures, circumstances, immature institutions. When it is Jaja's turn, he does not speak about who was more right in those cabinet battles, about which policy could have saved what. Instead, he talks about time. "We thought we had more of it," he tells the room. "We thought we had decades to learn how to govern, how to manage diversity, how to argue without killing each other. We believed mistakes could be corrected gradually, like a road repaired in sections. We did not understand that there were people watching the clock with a different impatience. When their time ran out, they reached for guns." The hall is so quiet that the buzz of the fluorescent lights becomes audible. After the event, outside in the fading light, a young woman who introduced herself as a political science student asks him, "If you had one more year back then, what would you have done differently?" And the question hits him harder than any accusation. One more year, 12 months. 365 days between civilian missteps and military takeover. "I would have used every day to build trust," he says slowly. "Not just between parties, but between regions, between civilians and soldiers. Between the government and the governed, we spent too much time arranging chairs at the top and not enough time strengthening the floor beneath us. She nods, scribbling notes. He wants to tell her to put the notebook down, to look around instead, to see the warning signs in her own time. But she is already being called away by friends. Life moves quickly for the young. His health begins to fail gradually, then suddenly, doctors talk about blood pressure, about stress that never really left his body, about the toll of years spent in conflict zones of the mind and the map. He feels the new deadline like a physical weight, not the political deadlines of conferences and cabinet meetings, but the personal one that no vote can extend. In his study, he starts sorting papers late into the night, old speeches with handwritten notes in the margins, letters from foreign diplomats, some congratulatory, some veiled with threats, drafts of essays he never published, where he tried to capture what it meant to be at the birth of a nation and to watch that nation nearly devour itself. He does not have the luxury of writing memoirs at leisure. Every long session at his desk ends with his family urging him to rest, with a reminder that the heart has its own timetable. Still, he insists on preserving certain things. The draft of the speech where he first condemned apartheid at the UN, with coffee stains from a long night of revisions, the notes from heated discussions about recognizing China, margins crowded with exclamation points, a photograph of the day Nigeria's flag was raised in New York, edges yellowed, colors fading but still visible, green, white, green against a pale sky. Sometimes visitors come, younger diplomats, activists, journalists. They want to know what it felt like to be first permanent representative, first foreign minister, first to speak for Nigeria in certain rooms. He tells them the truth that rarely makes it into ceremonial speeches. Being first is not glorious. It is terrifying. There is no template, no precedent, no one whose mistakes you can study. Every decision you make becomes the reference point for those who come after, whether you meant it to or not. One evening, after a long conversation with a young Foreign Service officer, he walks the man to the gate. The officer hesitates, then asks, "Sir, do you ever regret speaking so bluntly? About Congo, about apartheid, about big powers? Some say we might have had fewer problems if we had been more compliant." Jaja looks at him carefully. "Compliant countries may get loans," he says, "but they rarely get respect. And when the drought comes, political or economic, loans are not what keep a nation together. It is the people's belief that their country stands for something more than survival." The officer nods, absorbing more than the words. Somewhere inside him, a decision is being made about what kind of diplomat he will be. The rival's health declines as well. News filters through circles of old comrades, hospital visits, complications, a quiet funeral attended by dignitaries who speak in past tense about service, about dedication, about moderation. Jaja does not attend, not out of lingering hatred, but because his own body will not allow the journey. He sits instead by a window, listening to the radio once again. Different voices now, different crises, but the same rhythm of announcements, coups in other countries, elections disputed, international, sanctions imposed, peace conferences convened. He realizes something with a clarity that cuts through the fog of illness. The real rivalry was never between him and that other minister. It was between two visions of what Nigeria could be, one cautious, eager to stay in the good books of powerful friends, the other stubbornly insistent on dignity, even when it was expensive. History has not delivered a final verdict. The country still swings between those poles, sometimes in the same week. When his own last day comes in 1996, the world does not stop. Planes land and take off from airports he once tried to reform. Nigerian diplomats send cables from embassies in cities whose names he used to circle on his maps. Young politicians make speeches, some of them unconsciously borrowing phrases he introduced into the country's political language. News of his death moves quickly in some circles, slowly in others. To those who knew him personally, it is the loss of a presence, of a booming voice, a sharp eye, an uncompromising laugh. To those who know him only from textbooks, it is a footnote. Died November 7th, 1996. But legacy is not measured in the length of obituaries. It is measured in the trajectory of a nation. Every time Nigeria takes an independent stance in international affairs, refusing to be a rubber stamp for someone else's agenda, a faint echo of his arguments can be heard. Every time a Nigerian diplomat speaks forcefully about African dignity, about injustice in one corner of the world being a threat to stability everywhere, they are walking a path he helped clear with his words. His story stretched from barefoot boy in Nwaland to the green marble wall of the UN and back to a quiet study filled with remembering. Is more than a biography. It is a warning and a challenge, wrapped into one life. The warning is simple. Time is never as abundant as leaders think. The countdown to crisis starts long before the first shot is fired, long before the first decree is read on the radio. The challenge is harder. To speak and act as if the future matters more than personal safety or temporary favor. To choose dignity when submission would be easier. To build institutions that can survive both loud personalities and loud coups. Somewhere in Nigeria, a child is born on a red earth road, looking up at a sky that has never heard of the United Nations. Somewhere else, another child watches a television showing clips from old archives. Grainy footage of a man named Jaja Wachuku speaking to a hall of nations. Between those two children, a question hangs in the air like a flag being slowly raised. When the next narrow window of time opens, who will step through it and what will they dare to say?